So it's much cooler today. We're at 36 degrees right now. Yesterday we were 70 degrees. Last night I was watching TV, Prime. We're watching 24 right now. I never watched 24. Getting off subject just a little bit. I've never watched the TV show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, but everybody raved about it when it was playing. I mean, even talk show radio hosts. I used to have to drive long distances in my own business, and I'd listen to these radio talk show hosts, and they would even talk about it. But I'm watching and I'm thinking, man, this is kind of like bad acting, over dramatization. But I'm sticking with it. Carolyn's already given up on it. She goes and watches some other show on her phone while I'm watching mine. I'm gonna guess 8-ish o'clock maybe. A straight line storm, cold front came through. The phones were ringing, warnings, tornado warnings, and hail, strong winds. So I jumped out here, and by the time I got the warning, I came outside, it wasn't raining, and then by the time I got into the truck, it was just gully washing. So I moved the truck over here in some hopeful attempt that the limbs on the tree would protect it from these quarter-size hail, and it would cause damage to vehicles. I had hoped that this would protect it. In the springtime, it will protect it because there's leaves on it very thick. But with it still being March, there's no leaves on it, so the storm lasted for 5 minutes, it was over. I mean, it was just a gully wash rain for 5 minutes, done. So it wasn't even that bad. It was really a weird storm. Well, so it dropped immediately from 70 degrees down into the 40s, but the house was still pretty warm, so I decided, well, Carolyn and I decided that we weren't going to start the wood stove. So I got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and started the wood stove. It was 68 degrees in the house. I figured, why not? But I tell you, boy, it was hard to get going. The only thing I can think is the chimney, we hadn't ran it in several days, so the chimney had cooled off quite a bit, and so there was nothing drawing it up. So I struggled and struggled, finally got it started. I went back to bed with the vent all the way out. I figured, well, when it gets too hot in here, I'll just wake up again from the heat and shut the vent. And that's exactly what I did. By that time, the coals were mostly gone. House is just now starting to cool off. That was 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 10 o'clock now. So it kept the house warm for a while. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. It's going to get up to 50s today. So they say. I don't know when. I don't really want to start another fire until this evening. Maybe I'll bring the propane heater in if I have to. As you know, I got a question the other day, how much firewood we have used. Well, as you know, I want to talk about this a little bit. I mean, I could just give you the answer, and probably should, but I think it's important that you have as much information as possible. And there are a lot of people who tell me that I explain things really well without over-explaining them. I don't know how I do that. The tiny house has 6-inch walls. I use 2x6s in them. So I think that's an R19 value insulation. And then I double insulated the attic. Well, now I'm thinking that maybe it's too much insulation. That wood stove just cooks you out of there. But it holds the heat in for so long. Like I said, the stove has just now burned out. The fan, that's where I tell that it's too cool. So the heat-driven fan, I've shown you that before, sits on top of the stove. When it stops, then I know that the wood stove is no longer producing any heat. That means all the heat that's in it is from the insulation. The only downside to the house, I've sealed up every corner, every crack with silicone or caulk when I was building it. Last 2 years ago, well, over a year and a half ago I started building it. You'll remember I caulked everything. Well, the only leaky spot in the house now is around the door, which doors have a leaky spot. And I've put some styrofoam stuff, squishy, the foamy stuff, strips, I put that there. And it helps, but that's the only really leaky spot that I got. This direction where the door is, anytime the wind is coming in the house from the door, it's coming from the south. So typically you're getting warm temperatures coming in from the south. The north side, this window, when wind hits it, it's coming from the north side, we don't get any air in there. That side of the house is just sealed up so well. So that's the biggest factor, is insulation. The other factor is it's such a small house. Now, if it wasn't insulated, the wood stove would struggle with this, I'm sure, if it wasn't insulated. I don't think it was a mistake to use 2x6s. A lot of people thought it was overkill. Some days when I'm lighting the stove and it's 90 degrees in the house, I think, man, it would be nice if I'd have used 2x4s or 2x6s. But then when the stove dies and I don't have to put any firewood in it, it really paid for itself. That is the biggest advantage to the amount of firewood we use. Now, last year, when we were living in a camper, I had 4 cords of firewood that I got throughout the summer. Remember, I'm trying to build a house and I was trying to get 4 cords. And you may remember, I don't know, the place has changed so much, you may not remember, that I had it all lined up down here by the camper where we were staying. So this wall right here, where the wagon is, all the way down to where this tire sits, I had firewood. That was 4 cords. And then we had an outdoor heat exchanger that I built. And it worked really well. I don't want to criticize it. It did its job. It did what we needed to do, and it kept the camper warm. The problem was it was so inefficient. I mean, you just constantly feeding firewood in it. Every 2 hours I'd come out, put firewood in it. As a matter of fact, in the nighttime, at nighttime I'd have to get up every couple hours, put more firewood in it. A lot of people complained that I had dark circles around my eyes. Well, that was the reason. I was trying to keep that fire going. Because you had to burn it so hot. I mean, remember, the wood stove was outside with bricks around it. It kept the camper overly hot sometimes, but you couldn't control it. I had to put a vent valve. Well, I still got some of the components still hanging off the camper. This is the ventilation that went into the camper. On the other side of this is a vent valve that I could close and open, and that would regulate the amount of heat that I was getting. But you had to keep it hot. The wood stove would have cooled down at all. You wouldn't get any heat in there. So it was just inefficient, but it worked. It kept us warm and it did its job. It just took a lot of firewood. Well, this year, we're not using any. Like I said, I got up at 2 o'clock, started the wood stove. It was a struggle to start. It didn't want to start. Here it is 10 o'clock, and I might start another fire. I may wait till noon, 1 o'clock. Typically, I try to start a fire if it's chilly out before Carolyn starts cooking, because she goes into the house so much, it cools off the house pretty quick. I also got this stack here from, I don't know, from the end down here to about right here probably. Got that 2 years ago also. We didn't touch that. That was too wet. We just couldn't burn it in this new wood stove. So we moved into the house in January out of the camper, which was a good thing because we'd have used all of this firewood. So then this year we got into the house and I had some sycamore stacked on the back porch and in the house. So, I mean, it wasn't a lot. It probably wasn't even a truckload of sycamore, and we burned that in the early season. October, November, some of December. And sycamore burns so fast, and it doesn't even get that hot. So instead of from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, when you're burning sycamore, it might have gotten you to 8 o'clock. So that's why you burn the less dense wood, warmer temperatures. Well, then when we ran out of that, we went into walnut. Walnut is only slightly more dense than sycamore. It's not got a lot of BTUs in it either. So we went on to walnut, and so this right here, what you see, this tarp is kind of draped down, that was walnut. That's not even a truckload there. So what I'm going to say is the walnut and the sycamore may have been a full truckload. It takes 3 truckloads to make a full cord, is what I've measured out. Until January, we used a truckload, October to January. Well, then we started in with the oak, and down here you'll see the oak that I've used. That is, I don't know, a foot and a half that I've taken off of that. And I probably won't take too much more from it. I've got some in the house. So I'm guessing we're at maybe 2 truckloads. Maybe 2/3 of a cord. I was thinking a half a cord when we started the season. I was thinking we'd use a half a cord. Now we don't have any more sycamore and very little walnut left. So that means next fall we'd have to use oak, which means we'll actually use less wood next year than we did this year because remember, oak will heat things up longer. It takes longer to burn. So instead of getting coals for 2 hours, we'll have coals sitting in that stove for 4 hours. So if we use 2/3 of a cord this year, I'm going to guesstimate next year, maybe a half a cord. I am going to replace what I used this year. I don't know how long I'm going to do this. I think I have enough to probably last me the rest of my life. This isn't all of it either. We got some down on the hill. Probably got another cord over there. I got some over here that's fallen over. I got to get picked up. Oh, and I didn't mention that. There's some laying on the ground that had fallen over down here also. So that's not all. When we moved here, and I told people we were moving on 1.5 acres in a tiny house, people told me we weren't going to be able to do it. That there is not enough firewood on 1.5 acres to heat. I've done it my entire life. I've worked 30 years. I burned firewood. I just knew that wasn't the case with these new efficient wood stoves, and I just knew it wasn't true. So all the wood that we put into the camper stove came from this property. It was all deadfall. Everything was deadfall. And it worked pretty good. All this has come from someplace else. We haven't gotten any of this firewood from here. It's people giving away free firewood. We're not using much, just like I expected. One last thing I want to mention is there's a YouTuber, Wrangler Star. He's a very large YouTuber. He stacks his firewood in a circle. I've done a lot of research on this. There's a guy in Montana. He did a lot of experiments seeing what dried faster. This kind of stacking or the circular stacking, and this dries faster. With oak, you have to do it this way. It could take up to 2 years to dry oak. If you'll check out the other channel here, this little up next box, I'd appreciate it. I hope I can inspire you to think small, but live big. Thanks for watching.